Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Stephanie Sandala. I am Programming and Outreach Specialist here at LibraryLink NJ. I am so thrilled to introduce Chad Sell and Jeffrey Brown. Chad Sell grew up in a small town in central Wisconsin. He lived in a neighborhood much like the one in Cardboard Kingdom. He also drew a lot and came up with a lot of colorful characters. His favorites were often the villains because despite being different and misunderstood, they were powerful and confident, and they got the best costumes. I agree. Chad lives in Connecticut with his husband and two cats. Jeffrey Brown is the best-selling cartoonist and author of Darth Vader and Son, as well as the middle grade Jedi Academy series. He was born in Grand Rapids, Michigan, where he grew up dreaming he would draw comics for a living. His books included graphic memoirs for adults, all ages humorous parodies, Star Wars adventures, and a Lucy and Andy Neanderthal series, which we all love. He currently lives in Chicago with his wife, two sons, and cat. Our moderator today is Christy Chadwick, a consultant with the Massachusetts Library System, adjunct faculty of the School of Library and Information Science at Simmons University, and an amazing moderator. Christy, thank you again for being here. We're happy to have you. And thank you, Chad and Jeffrey, for joining us.
Definitely. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining us. And thank you, everybody, for coming back again for another summer bash with our two great authors today. Usual is that I will be asking some questions both for both of our authors and a couple of individual ones too. But definitely, if you have questions for either Jeff or Chad, please put them in the chat because I would love to share them with them towards the end of what I have to ask. So we are going to go ahead and get started. And I just have a few questions for both of you to start off with. And obviously, I think our first question is always going to be, what do you have right now? What is your most recent work? And just tell us how your year has gone. Chad, why don't you start us off?
Well, gosh, so it's kind of a wild year. I have two new books coming out this fall. Is that what you're interested in? Or
you can tell us a little bit about, why don't you go ahead, you tell us whatever you want to tell us about your books.
So I've been juggling three different middle grade series, Cardboard Kingdom, Doodleville, and a new series that we'll be launching in September called The Stupendous Switcheroo. And that's a hybrid book with prose and comic sections. Max in the Midnight was a big inspiration for us with that format. And then the volume 3 of Cardboard Kingdom will be coming out in November. And that is called Snow and Sorcery, set during winter break for the kids in the Cardboard Kingdom.
Great. Jeff.
So my most recent book is Thor and Loki, Midgard Family Mayhem. So I always loved Star Wars, and but finally got the chance to jump into some Marvel characters, and Thor was one of the comics that I liked reading growing up. So it was like a lot of fun to kind of draw from that. And I had two older brothers, so Thor and Loki in my book are brothers getting into mischief both together and also setting each other up to get in trouble with their parents and things. And so a lot of my own experiences into the book. Yeah, and then I've had a really busy year working on multiple projects. So theoretically 3 books coming out this fall. So an X-Files book for adults called The Extra Files, and just like humorous one-page kind of gag comics for those X-Files fans out there. And a new Star Wars book, The Mandalorian and Child. So again, in the Darth Vader and Son format with full color, fun, cute little Grogu and Mandalorian comics. And then I'm working on a sequel to my Batman middle grade book, Batman and Robin and Howard. So Summer Breakdown is the new one, and it'll actually come out as 3 individual kind of comic issues. So the first issue should be out also in November. So November's going to be busy for me.
Yes, it
watching
certainly
all those.
sounds. Definitely. As long as you don't have a summer breakdown, I think that that's really
Yes.
important right now
I've
too.
avoided it, so and we're almost to the end of summer, so I think I'm good.
Definitely. So obviously, we'll talk a little bit about story in a minute, but one of the things that I think is great is the art and illustration. And, we've been able to read some of your bios and stuff, but kind of could both of you could talk about how art has it impacted your life, how it's been a big part of your life, and just kind of why that really became incorporated as your kind of like the way that your doorway into writing. So Jeff, why don't you go ahead and start with that?
Yeah, so I brought props too. So like
Yay.
I always loved reading. I always loved drawing. I always loved telling stories. And so from the beginning, I just loved like making my own little books. So actually, like here's Caveman. This one's a really short book, Caveman Ruff's life story. So it's only like a couple pages. But I was like fascinated with the idea of like making my own illustrated books. And for me, what I realized was not with like picture books, but with comics, especially, like I get to write and draw together. And so like drawing is fun on its own, but when you can tell stories with the drawing, it's like you get to do two things at once. And so it took me a while to come back around to that. So actually, like after high school, I went into college and got into like painting and thought like I'm going to be a painter and I'm just going to make images, and I knew there was something missing. And then the faculty at the art school are like, something's missing, and yeah, it's just the story. I need to have stories to my drawings. And then once I started drawing comics again, then it all clicked, and yeah, I just never looked back. So yeah, that's for me, it's just growing up, like I would read fun books and fun comics, and like I wanted to make those things, and somehow managed to do that.
Great. Chad.
I feel like throughout my life, I've always used art and storytelling to really explore stuff before I can even put it to words. I think this is true, I think, of a lot of young artists. You find yourself fixating on certain images, emotions, scenes, and like working through a lot that you're not even conscious of. I definitely did that in my college weekly newspaper. I was working through a whole lot of issues being a young adult on his own for his first time. And even in my new books, I find, you can't read Doodleville without realizing that the artist himself is going through a lot of insecurity and just inner demons that, become manifest in Doodleville itself. So I think that it's, for better or worse, it's kind of a complicated way that I'm sorting through my current interests and fascinations. Oftentimes, the seed of any new project for me is not a moral or a theme. It's often a question. Like, how far can your creativity take you? Or what happens when your own inner demons overcome your interest in your creativity? And it's in trying to answer that question from a lot of different angles that I structure that story and see it through.
Great. So, getting into the story, but also still keeping with the art, right now what we're discussing is middle grade, which Chad, a lot of your work focuses on anyway. Jeff, you've got work that really spans audiences, but what is it about the age group with middle grade that really kind of draws you into creating for that particular audience? Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the great thing about the middle grade space is in like I tend to not write thinking of a particular age group. I kind of write for myself. And what I found with middle grade is it really does let you kind of have both. Like you can have something that's good for kids, but also adults can enjoy. And like with Jedi Academy, I was able to put in lots of Easter eggs for like the Star Wars fans who grew up with the movies and like can find these things. But even though it's set in this story for younger readers, or with like Lucy and Andy Neanderthal, one of my favorite things that I got to do was put in all this science. And so you have these paleontologist characters. And so even though a lot of that science is maybe more advanced than some of the kids reading it, it's middle grade is a place where you can introduce new things. And even if kids aren't going to get it on the first read through, like they're still picking things up and absorbing things for later. And then the next time they read it, they catch something, or maybe like they remember reading a book a couple years ago, and then they go back and read it, and now they're getting something entirely new out of that experience. And so it's just been really fun to kind of layer in ideas in middle grade books.
Definitely. Chad.
I feel like my ideal reader in the middle grade space, and this is what I think is so special about middle grade, is that these kids are very thoughtful and observing, like Jeffrey said, like they're really taking in a lot and processing how the world works at that age. They're developing sophistication and analyzing what they're reading, and might read it over and over again. But they're just on the cusp of like their adolescence, when they discover irony and sarcasm and like youthful detachment from everything that their parents tell them to do. And so it's that big-hearted earnestness and the really big feelings without being kind of self-conscious about it. Cardboard Kingdom is all about dressing up in cardboard costumes and going out and having adventures with your friends. And it relies on a reader not being self-conscious and being the kind of kid who would totally go put on a costume and go play make-believe with his friends.
My grandson loves making cardboard costumes right now.
Awesome.
His plan is to make his costume
Ooh.
out of a cardboard box for Halloween. I still haven't figured out how he's doing this and what exactly he's doing, but cardboard is very important, I think.
Part of the process, it's fun figuring it out as you go along.
Yes.
And making mistakes and fixing it along the way. I mean, what I like about cardboard is that it's disposable, it's recyclable. It's something that you don't buy. It's not some fancy thing. It's not some finite resource, really. Pretty much anyone has more cardboard than they know what to do with. And hopefully he can make something awesome.
Terrific. So let's continue, Chad, about Cardboard Kingdom. So, you created Cardboard Kingdom with several writers. And you also, though, have Doodleville, which you wrote and illustrated yourself. So you have this collaborative work and solo work, too. Why did you decide to do kind of like go collaboration to solo in those? And add on to that, how were those particular projects similar and how were they different for you?
Well, I had worked for a long time trying to get my own comics published that I had written and drawn myself. But the process of trying to make a whole book and to sell a book and see it through is like a long, and it can be a very, very lonely process. And I think what's so hard about doing something entirely on your own is having the perspective and the confidence to know what is working and what isn't, and how to fix things that aren't working yet. It's a really iterative process. And so I had felt a little bit stalled out. And I had this big framework idea of Cardboard Kingdom, of a whole neighborhood full of kids who all have their own adventures and characters that they play as. But I just wasn't quite sure who all those kids would be, let alone what their stories would be. And so this was like early days of like Kickstarter and crowdfunding and crowdsourcing, like around 2014, 2015. And the idea struck me that maybe I could find a group of writers who were looking for an artist, who were excited about my idea for Cardboard Kingdom, to sign on. And each of them brought a few characters. And I worked with a total of 10 writers on book one. And it was so magical and exciting. As soon as people would send in their story ideas, I could see so clearly what worked, what I was excited about, what I could picture on the page. And if there was anything that needed fixing, I often had an idea of how to fix it. And it really felt like there was nothing we couldn't figure out over the course of a phone call, just talking through a story. There was like, after working alone for so long, it was so generative and exciting to work together on the book. And so the whole process felt fairly magical and miraculous that it all got made and that we got a book deal and that it did well when it came out. And so we just we invested all of our ideas into that first book and had nothing left. And if anyone had asked us to make a sequel, we would have just come up totally empty. And so then I thought, well, gosh, what do I do next? And it was working on Cardboard Kingdom where I developed my confidence as a storyteller and finally felt like, oh, maybe I can do this on my own. And I had this idea for Doodleville for a long time. And that's a very personal story about an artist kind of going through all of the trials of, young, youthful creativity. And but even a book that you write and draw yourself, in many ways is still a collaborative process. Several of my Cardboard Kingdom writers gave early feedback on my Doodleville work that really helped shape that whole story. Any writer is working with an agent, with an editor eventually, who all are giving feedback that can like dramatically shape the whole book or the whole series. And so I found it really exciting to work on Doodleville, but then working by yourself, like I said, can be kind of lonely too. So actually for several years, I would switch my books between the two series. So collaborating solo. And that worked pretty well. Oftentimes when I would be drawing a book, I would be having my team like write the next Cardboard Kingdom book. And then Stupendous Switcheroo was also a collaboration with my friend Mary Wynn Hyder. So it's like a balance of going back and forth, and I think that's important for anyone throughout their career.
Definitely. And even as you mentioned, those collaborations are different because, Cardboard Kingdom is a group. You said you had 10 writers for the first one. And I believe with your third one, you've added a new writer also. So you've had changes in those, but it's still a larger group, but you only have one for Switcheroo. So how is that different, working with, that kind of group and just working with one other person?
It's much more like an equal partnership on Switcheroo, where we agree on consensus, like what to do and what our vision is. And Mary Wynn, so we kind of established the story, and then Mary Wynn does writing, shares every draft with me, we talk through it, and then once our editor signs off on the manuscript for that book, then I do all the art. And so like I said, that's a hybrid format where it's prose with comics and illustrations. And so once the layouts are all ready, I'll start doing all the art for the books. So it is a really different process. And Mary Wynn's, I really was excited about the hybrid format because like someone like Mary Wynn does such magical work with the prose where you just really feel like you're inside a character's head and seeing all the quirks of their imagination and their humor. And it's something that I just can't quite capture solely in comics. And I don't have to necessarily draw everything. Sometimes she can just describe something amazing that happens, and the reader can picture it in their own heads rather than me having to draw it all.
Well, we're definitely excited for that.
Thanks.
So, Jeff, you have written and illustrated many books from your own original ideas, but obviously, as you mentioned, a lot of readers know you from your IP work, your intellectual property work, Star Wars and Marvel and DC. So how is working within an IP universe different than doing your own original work?
Yeah, I mean, they both have their pros and cons. And for me, one of the things was that I hadn't really written an extended fictional narrative before the first Jedi Academy book. I'd done longer autobiographical books, but since I'm just pulling from life, it's more of like a process of arranging than building a narrative. So I'm just arranging stories to create or capture feelings. And then with Jedi Academy, well, now I've got to have like a narrative arc, and being able to work with an established universe, I didn't have to come up with all the rules of how everything worked, or, you know, like I didn't have to come up with what the Force was and what the rules of being a Jedi are. There's a lot of backstory that's already there. Or same with Batman. It's like kind of the basics of who Batman is and who Robin is and how superheroes exist within the world of DC. You know, that there's a lot of that kind of grunt work that's already done. Whereas when I went to Lucy and Andy Neanderthal, then I had to, not only do I have to come up with the story, I have to come up with all the characters and all that grunt work also. So what was great is that starting with Jedi Academy, I kind of had a lot of practice working out these longer narratives before I had to do it with my own characters, and that kind of made it easier. And then there's like little tricks, like so with Jedi Academy is set in a middle school, so you have the school year is kind of gives you kind of a skeleton to build the narrative around. So it's like, you know, I know like I have the start of the story as he's just getting to school and he's confused and figuring things out, and you know the end of the story is going to be the final exam, and so like it's this big challenge that he has to overcome, and then it's just filling in things between those two kind of big plot points. So yeah, and so now that I've done things enough, now it's fun to go back and forth, because like sometimes it's just okay, I can do another Batman story and I don't need to, you know, come up with a whole new set of characters and figure everything out. I can just focus on what is the story going to be. Yeah, so that's kind of, I guess, the biggest difference. I guess the other big difference is just the kind of the restrictions that you work on under creatively. Whereas with Lucy and Andy Neanderthal, or with my Space-Time series, I could kind of make up the rules as I went and decide like this is how it's going to be. And you can't do that when you're working with Star Wars or with Marvel Comics. Like there's certain things and sometimes it's very particular things, like what color someone's hair is, and sometimes it's like kind of a more general character trait, like this character would never do that. But whereas, you know, as a writer, it's like if you write your character to do something, that's in character. So so sometimes it's you could think that would be annoying to have those restrictions, but sometimes it's also becomes like this creative challenge where it's like if it's wide open and you don't have any restrictions, that can also be a little intimidating, because you like, how do I limit myself? Whereas working with an IP, then you're like, okay, I know that I'm working within these barriers, and I kind of like gives you like a more contained place to like organize things.
Yeah, definitely. So actually, I'm going to follow up in regards to with working with the IPs that you've worked with. Had you kind of searched those out, or were there calls for the books themselves and you pitched what you had? How did that come about?
You know, it's been very organic and kind of just I couldn't have planned it the way it's worked out. So the first Star Wars book, Darth Vader and Son, originated with Google. Actually, it was like they had the idea of doing a Google Doodle with Luke and Vader, instead of battling for the fate of the galaxy, just, you know, how awkward it would be if they were just going grocery shopping or doing something every day together. And my son was 4 at the time, so when they called me with the idea, I was like, oh, I'll make my son 4, put Vader in my shoes. And Google ended up not using the idea. They're like, yeah, we doesn't fit. We're not going to use it after all. But I'd done all these sketches, so I'd worked with Chronicle Books, and I knew that Chronicle had also done a lot of books with Lucasfilm. So I was like, hey, can you take this to Lucasfilm and pitch it? So we pitched Darth Vader and Son, and they liked it. And then what happened was Jedi Academy happened because my editor at Lucasfilm on the Darth Vader books was there, and Scholastic came in and was like, we want to do a middle grade, Star Wars book, and like heavily illustrated. And my editor was like, oh, I'm working with this guy, see if he has anything going on. So then I got to do Jedi Academy. And then over the years, it's, just those people are familiar with the work, and conversations come up where, someone who worked at Lucasfilm ends up at DC Comics, and then they start with this idea of doing more younger readers books, and they remember Jedi Academy, and they're like, hey, maybe this guy would like to do some DC Comics things, or so it's been really fun, because there's still been space for me to do my own books, like the Lucy and Andy series, or I did the My Teacher is a Robot picture book. But then these other opportunities come up where I'm like, okay, yeah, like I've always kind of wanted to do something with Batman, and I don't know that I would have pitched it if they hadn't come to me and say, hey, do you want to do something with DC?
Right. No, that definitely sounds like it did develop very organically, and just one of the ways that you can actually kind of build from there. And that's pretty amazing. So we did talk a little bit already, kind of what you have forthcoming for the rest of the year. So I'm going to switch that question a little bit and kind of ask both of you, what would you like to try to do in the future? Is there something that you haven't done yet that you would like to do, whether it's a different audience or a different style? Chad, you said you've been excited about doing the hybrid. Is there something else that you would like to think about doing? And since that's a new question, it may take you a minute to think about that. So I'm going to make Jeff go first.
Yeah. So I always have lots of things that, like, I actually have like this whole like little list of future projects that, someone can like screen grab that now, and
it was very blurry.
decipher.
Nobody's going to be able to read it.
But I have like this whole list of like, here's vague. Some of them are like very vague, and some are like more specific of like ideas of projects I'd like to do someday. And like, so for one is I've done the longer middle grade books, but they've always been in black and white, and my color work has always been the shorter books. And part of that is because I still color analog, and so it's very time consuming to hand color a page, and if I mess up, I've got to redraw and recolor the entire page. So, but I have a epic fantasy adventure story that has been in the back of my mind for years. And it was actually when the pandemic happened, I had some extra time, and I kind of started chipping away at rough drafts. And so this book would be about 400 pages in the last draft, and I want to draw it full color. So I think that's like the next like thing, where it's like kind of combining the really intense full color art that I do in the Darth Vader books, but with a longer narrative like I do in the middle grade books. So
great. And you inspired another question, but I'll be back to that in a moment. Chad, how about you?
Well, so we're hoping that Switcheroo goes for a while. We're putting out a lot of books in a pretty quick succession. But in between those books, I've been experimenting with some YA ideas. I would really love to do like a gay romance, of course, with like magical fantasy elements, because like that stuff. And there's like an autobio book that I've been working on and off for like 15 years. That means a lot to me, and I'd like that to finally come out into the world. So yeah.
Great. So Jeff just mentioned that he colors analog. So now we're going to dive into that a little bit. So tell us a little bit about, kind of the illustration process so that we can have an understanding. Obviously, I mean, I come from a time where all of the cartoons that I used to see were with the people hunched over their slanted desk and a pencil, feverishly coloring in. And sometimes you forget that obviously a lot of illustration is now done digitally. So Jeff just talked about his analog, but Jeff, do you do anything digitally at all?
I do. So actually, I have some show and tell here. So this is a look into the process for the Mandalorian Child. So my initial sketches, an initial cover idea, but they didn't like that idea. But they liked this page that I penciled for the interior. The problem is they wanted it flipped, so I had to repencil it. I couldn't just ink and color that page. But like I'm drawing again and again, and Mandalorian's armor isn't quite right, or Grogu's face isn't quite right, so I have to keep redrawing, and then there's the finished piece. So for the color work, it's all on. I work on this like really thick illustration board, and like I said, so if I'm not happy with something, I've got to redraw it. The middle grade black and white books they tend to be more intensive on the story side. So the first draft is kind of like a stick figure rough draft where I'll have a sketchbook like not this size, but like a fuller size, write and draw the entire book, and it's like stick figures. Get notes from my editor, and then I'll do a first or a second rough draft that's more finished, a little nicer, and it's on this super thin paper. But you can see it's like pretty rough. This page doesn't have anything, but I'll cross stuff out and it'll be really messy. And then what I do is I'll get a sheet of Bristol board, and I'll lay that on, and then I have a light box to use the rough draft as a guide. But again, so here's this page, and I messed something up with the car, had to redraw that. So there's the final page. And so even then, so there might be like smaller text mistakes, and those I'll actually go in and fix in Photoshop. So sometimes it's redrawing an entire panel, and then I'll scan that and Photoshop the panel in. Although I'm just as likely to cut the panel out and tape it over the page. And the Batman book was actually digitally colored by someone else. So this is that final page colored. But yeah, I still you can see the final printed page is I've drawn the same size, and I like to have a sense of what is this going to look like when someone's reading it as I'm doing it. So I like to I don't tend to draw really big and then shrink it down, or I try to draw at the size you're going to see it, and which is another reason why I like some of my autobiographical work. Also, I've drawn in sketchbooks, so reading the sketchbook is like you're reading this. You get the same experience as if you read the printed published copy.
Terrific. Chad, can you tell us a little bit about your process for illustration?
Well, I work totally differently. I work all digitally. I dream of just drawing on paper at some point for a book, but it feels too cumbersome. And also I have this deep gnawing fear that I've been drawing digitally for so long. I think I'm just better at drawing digitally than I am on paper. It's great to be loosey-goosey and have fun and doodle on paper, but when it comes down to doing the finished artwork, I have so many finely tuned little tools and brushes that I use in my program Clip Studio Paint that they just feel like second nature to me. And in Clip Studio Paint, from the very first step of making a book, you can basically make a whole, giant blank PDF and start filling in pages, even if it's just writing a single line, like what happens on each page. And that allows you to visually like zoom out and like look at your whole book at any given time, delete pages, rearrange pages, start noodling in some sketches, ideas, and then at any point in that process, export it all as a PDF, share it with collaborators, share it with your editor, with your agent. And so that's what I do. There are times when I like desperately wish I didn't have to spend so much time chained to my computer desk. And I do have a Microsoft Surface that I can go sit on the couch and continue drawing when I need to. But yeah, I do it all digitally. And then my coloring process is also digital. I kind of like the really slick, really even, bright coloring that you can really only get digitally, or if you use a really nice paint or something. So yeah, it's a little less exciting than Jeff. I don't have show and tell unless I were to show my screen.
That's okay. But honestly, I think that having the two of you with those different processes is really kind of exciting, because honestly, you don't hear as much about people working analog as you do, digitally, but you can see the pros and cons of both and being able to work that way and how it inspires you for that. And
Yeah. I would say too, like it's kind of nice that we are at these kind of opposite ends, because there are so many cartoonists who work every like space between the two of us, like mixing digital. I know some cartoonists who they like to do their rough draft kind of digital, and then they do they print out those pages and then lay over paper to ink, and so like the final page is like hand inked. Or people that will do pencil rough drafts and then do digital inks over like those pencils. And there's really no like one right way to do it. Like you find the way that works best for you. And it's like I similar to Chad, like I have the kind of opposite thing where it's like, man, I like sometimes I really wish I could get myself to color digitally or do this part of the project digitally, and I just can't. And then I'm like try to remember to not beat myself up about it, and just like it's okay, like maybe someday there'll be a project. And same with you, Chad, like I would guess that even though you say you're afraid that you wouldn't be able to like draw the same, but like I'm pretty sure you could sit down and draw something perfectly, ink on paper, no problem. But there's no reason to like beat yourself up about the way you work if you're making the books that you want to make.
I am actually going to have a question from our chat, which I think kind of follows this pretty well, with who were you inspired by other comic book artists? And if so, who were they? When in your time period of work were they, or in your childhood? Who has inspired you with those kind of works? Chad, I'll let you start off.
I grew up loving, 90s superhero comics. So like people like Jim Lee or even Joe Madureira. I would often copy the poses that I would see in the superhero comics, but with my own character in that pose. And that led to a lot of weird stylistic tics because they were drawing comics in really weird ways back then. And I think as you get older, different art styles appeal to you and like help you level up and get to like the next stage. Like after college, I got really into Adrian Tomina, and this cartoonist Arkikuo Johnson and Jaime Hernandez. And they all just did beautiful, sophisticated things with their figures, with using very simple lines and compositions to tell really rich, complicated stories. And I really admired that. I had a hard time paring down all the extra detail in my work and boiling it down to that like essential cartoony way of seeing the world that I think is so special about the medium.
Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, there's so more influences than I could possibly count. I think even even looking at someone's art who I'm not going to draw anything like they do, I feel like becomes an influence. Just seeing how other people draw things, whether it's just being inspired, because it's like I could never draw like that, but I really appreciate seeing it. But I mean, I grew up with like starting with like Garfield and The Far Side and newspaper comics, then superhero comics, mostly like Marvel comics with like John Romita Jr. or Walt Simonson. As I got older, I got into like the more indie comics, like Julie Doucet, Dan Clowes, some of the European cartoonists or artists like Mobius. And you know, it's funny because sometimes I know that those influences are there, but the artist would never be able to pick them out. So like Eddie Campbell, he was the artist probably best known for doing the artwork for Alan Moore's From Hell comic. But also like I knew him from, he did a series called Bacchus, and his style like was kind of a big inspiration to me, and like I see it as an influence. But one time I had the chance to meet him and I was telling him this, and he's like okay, I guess if you say that influence is there. I mean, I think he was like half joking, but you know, it's like I think the more stuff you look at, you absorb it, even if it's not like a conscious decision. Like I'm gonna copy, like for me, the big one I copied when I was growing up was Art Adams, and I used to like do the same thing as Chad, where it's like, except I didn't even bother to come up with my own characters. I was just trying to redraw Wolverine, basically.
Yes. Excellent. I would totally do that too. So comic books and graphic novels have really been a game changer for literacy, particularly for kids who identify as boys a lot of times. So when you're thinking, both of you, about constructing the books you do you think about literacy skills at all? What your reader might understand? I know we talked a little bit about kind of story and everything at the beginning, but do you ever think about kind of what the reader understands in the books that you have actually done a combination of the prose and illustration for? Chad, do you have any response for that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, a lot of my work early on and when I'm planning out each page and how to tell the story, I'm always really, really laser focused on clarity. You know, some people, when they first approach a graphic novel, don't even know how to read the panels. You know, there might be way too much detail and it might be confusing. I find a lot of comics that are published, you often don't know exactly what's going on. You know, what is this character reacting to? I don't understand. So I really, really, really try to visually make everything super clear, have the characters be very expressive, and you understand like the emotional reality of what's going on. You know, in Cardboard Kingdom, there are a few chapters that are wordless, you know, where we tell the story entirely with the pictures. But it is a tricky balance, because you want things to be very clear and understandable for kids of, you know, between 8 and 12, but you also don't want to be super heavy-handed or simplistic or moralizing. And you know, we try to have some complexity and nuance and layers there. And I'm sure that it occasionally does go over readers' heads, but I'm hoping it's not because of literacy limitations. I don't think that we use very complicated vocabulary for the most part. I think you know, whatever complexity is hopefully a kind of richness to the story that might take a reader a few readings to fully understand.
Great.
Yeah, I don't think I maybe in looking back at work, but while I'm making work, I don't really think about it. I just think about telling story. And then I work with editors who will pull me back. Usually it's along the lines of like, here's a concept. I think 8 to 12-year-olds this concept might be a little advanced, or the way I'm presenting it might be a little more complicated than is right for the story. But I feel like literacy from comics, it comes from story. So when you're taking your high school English classes and you're looking at Grapes of Wrath or Great Gatsby or whatever these classics of literature are, I'm not deconstructing sentence structure at that point. I'm deconstructing story. I'm learning about character development and plot and themes and metaphors and all these different things that come with story. And the literacy just kind of comes as a benefit of reading these stories. And for kids, what I found is if no matter how much a kid struggles with reading, once you start to find things that they like to read, they struggle less and less. And so if you have good stories, that's the way to break through. And I think one of the things with graphic novels now, like when I was a kid, we were not nearly as spoiled as kids are today with the kind of kinds and variety of comics and graphic novels that are available, like and just in terms of subject matter and style, and just overall quality of story. And so I think I never think about, I'll let my editors worry about this word is not like this age appropriate vocabulary, but I just try to focus on like, what is the story that I'm telling, and like, is this a story that kids will enjoy reading? And I also think kids, they tend, like, I don't know, maybe it's just my kids are like way smarter than me or something, because they know way more than like it's scary sometimes how like they know things. And so I think you can actually give kids a lot more credit, I think, sometimes than they've been given in the past.
I agree with you on that for sure. And I think a lot of us here probably agree with you on that too. So Sharon, thank you for those questions. And I have a question from Megan, who is asking, what is the best advice for a kid who wants to create a graphic novel? So do you have advice about where they could start?
I recommend starting with mini comics. I actually did some recent library workshops in Connecticut, teaching kids how to do, gosh, I wish I had my example, how to do a super simple little zine, just taking one piece of paper, doing some folds, doing one cut, and you can make a little 6-page mini comic out of it. And what's so cool about it is that you can then just unfold it and make Xeroxes of it, and then have a whole print run of your own zine. And I think it's, you can look at all these big, thick graphic novels and manga series and stuff, and, a young artist might want to be doing stuff at that length, but that takes, publishers and years of work. But what I love about comics is that you can literally make a little mini comic by yourself with the simplest of tools in an afternoon. And I think just seeing a finished product and like holding it in your hands and being able to make copies of it to give or trade or sell to your friends and family is really powerful. And I think starts a young artist on that path of realizing, oh, I can make actual books and put them out into the world.
I think a zine is a perfect way to do it. And kudos to you for doing those workshops. That's awesome. Jeff, how about you?
Yeah, I'm actually jealous of that answer, because I never really thought of that in those terms, because so my childhood was filled with unfinished things, because I think for me a lot of the time I got ahead of myself, and I did think like, okay, I'm going to write a comic, it's got to be like this big graphic novel, or I guess for prose the equivalent would be like, I'm going to write the great American novel. But I've always been, I think, a little better at short stories. And so like a mini comic is like, that's such an obvious thing when you now that you've said it, is like, yeah, start with something that's manageable. But but the advice that I always give a two-part advice, and the first thing is just make work. So don't get caught up in how it's going to turn out or what people will think of it, or like definitely don't need to think about like who is going to publish it or like all that. Just sit down and focus on making work, and then read everything you can. Just like even things that you don't like, if someone recommends to you a book to read, try it out. And doesn't matter if you like it or not, you'll still learn a lot about the craft that goes into making a book just from reading books.
Absolutely. M. Brzezowski has a question for Chad, and if Chad could build any costume out of cardboard, what would it be?
So my first thought was the sorceress, because she's kind of like my iconic character that I love. But the thing about the sorceress is that she doesn't actually have that much cardboard in her costume. So if I magically could create anything out of cardboard, I think I would go for a giant robot costume, because a robot costume is so big and clunky. I think it's hard to actually make it at all comfortable and wearable, but it would be super awesome. And I love doing a robot voice.
Ooh, robot voice. I mean, you have to have that
Yeah.
for that too. So, Jeff, do you want to build something out of cardboard?
Yeah, I mean, so for me, I'm like, costumes are not my strong suit. Like my son loves to build costumes, and so it's like just like lots of different like I don't they don't even have a real world equivalent. He's just like attaching cardboard to his body. But I just like making boxes into things, whether it's like a boat. Usually for some reason they're boats, even though I'm not a big boat guy, but the boxes are usually boats. And yeah, so I just like tailoring what I build to what boxes we get in the house, and then they get passed to the cat.
All right. Yes. Cat usually gets first choice in my house. So definitely we have a few more minutes. If other people have any questions they want to put in chat, I'm going to go back to my question, which I always ask is, what are you reading right now? Jeff, are you reading something you'd love to share for us?
I have it with me.
Oh, yes.
So I'm reading a biography of Garth Williams, the children's book illustrator. So the one that the reason that I specifically wanted to read about his life is Little Fur Family by Margaret Wise Brown. And his illustrations are just like, I love them. And so I'm always interested in learning about other artists' process and how their lives like influence the work they make. I don't know. I think it's always really interesting. So that is my current
All right.
reading.
Excellent. How about you, Chad?
I've been gradually rereading Calvin and Hobbes, which is a delight. And right now I'm in the middle of The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers, which I love sci-fi, and I love Becky Chambers' A Psalm for the Wild Build. I thought that was incredible, and the sequel to that. So I'm revisiting her earlier series, and it's like great. And I know that there are several books in the series, so I'm super excited to dive into all of that.
Yes, Becky Chambers, everything that they have written, it just speaks. And everything is like, it's short too, kind of what Jeff mentioned about short stories. These are longer, they're novellas, but they have that way of being able to take a small package and make it so much bigger. So awesome. I'm glad you're doing that. I don't see any more questions. So Stephanie, do you have anything you would like to add into this? And I do want to say thank you so much to Chad and Jeff for answering all the questions from me and our participants and joining us this afternoon to talk about your craft. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Can I quickly mention that I'll be at the Glen Rock Children's Book Festival on October 1st, in case any New Jersey librarians want to come to that event.
All right, excellent. Yes, we see applause. Jeff, is your face being shown anywhere in the next few months?
Yes. Where though? I forget. I would need to look. I know I'm doing something.
All right,
I know
both of
I'm
our
doing-
authors are
I have-
doing things.
Yeah. I should have it listed online. Although now that I think about it, I probably haven't updated that since San Diego Comic-Con. So I will need to do that.
All right, we look forward to that too. All right, Stephanie, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Jeffrey and Chad, for being here. These were great answers. I really loved hearing about your illustration process, especially analog and digital. So that was so fun. So yeah, thank you again for being here. It was such a great time. And thank you again, Christy, for such great questions too.
Thank you.
So yes, thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah, thank you.